When I first met Bailey, I wasn't sure how things would go. He was a golden retriever with warm brown eyes, but there was something in them, something that made my heart ache. I had just moved into my new house, hoping for a fresh start after everything I'd been through. Life had been tough lately. My mom passed away 6 months ago, and I was still struggling to cope. She had always been my rock, and now, without her, I felt lost. I wasn't even planning on getting a dog, but when I visited the shelter, something about Bailey pulled me in. He sat quietly in his kennel while the other dogs barked and jumped around. He just looked at me, deeply, as if he knew me somehow. The shelter worker told me his last owner had passed away, and that he hadn't been the same since. I understood that pain too well. So without thinking twice, I signed the papers and brought him home. From the moment we stepped inside, I noticed something strange. Bailey wouldn't leave my side, not even for a second. If I moved to the kitchen, he followed. If I sat on the couch, he curled up right at my feet. Even when I went to bed, he lay on the floor beside me, watching over me like a silent guardian. At first, I thought it was just because he was adjusting to his new home. But as the days passed, it became clear. This wasn't just about settling in. It was something deeper. Something I didn't understand yet. And soon, I would learn the truth. A truth that would leave me speechless. Bailey's attachment to me wasn't just unusual, it was intense. No matter where I went, he was right there, his eyes never leaving me. At first, I found it comforting. After all, I had been feeling so alone. Having Bailey around made the silence in my house less unbearable. But as the days went by, his behavior became unsettling. He never relaxed. Most dogs would nap, explore, or at least play with their toys. But Bailey? He was always alert. If I sat on the couch, he sat beside me, his head resting on my lap. If I got up to do the dishes, he followed, standing so close I could feel his breath on my leg. At night, it was even more intense. I woke up one evening to find him sitting next to my bed, staring at me. His ears were perked up, his body tense. "Bailey?" I whispered, reaching down to pet him. His body was warm, but I could feel his muscles tight under my fingers. He was on edge. I turned on the bedside lamp and looked around. The house was quiet, nothing out of place, but Bailey wouldn't settle. His eyes darted toward the bedroom door, and he let out a low, almost inaudible whine. It sent a shiver down my spine. "Is something wrong, boy?" I asked softly. He didn't move. He just sat there, watching the door, as if he was waiting for something, or someone. I tried to brush it off, telling myself he was just adjusting to his new home. But deep down, a strange feeling settled in my chest. Something wasn't right. And soon I would find out why. The next morning, I woke up feeling drained. Bailey had stayed by my side the entire night, refusing to sleep. Every so often, he would lift his head, ears twitching at sounds I couldn't hear. I told myself it was nothing. Just a dog adjusting to a new home. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. As I made my morning coffee, Bailey sat at my feet, his gaze locked on the front door. His tail didn't wag, his body stiff. "Bailey, what's going on with you?" I asked, crouching down to run my fingers through his fur. "You're acting strange, buddy." He nuzzled into my hand as if trying to comfort me. That's when I heard it. A soft creak. It came from the hallway. I froze, my heart pounding. I lived alone. There shouldn't be any noises except the ones I made. Slowly, I turned my head toward the hallway. The air felt heavier, colder. Bailey let out a low growl. It was the first time I had ever heard him do that. I swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the counter. "Hello?" My voice was barely above a whisper. Silence. Then, another sound, this time like a faint shuffle. Bailey lunged forward, barking furiously, his body blocking mine. The suddenness of it made my breath hitch. His hackles were raised, his stance protective, and then, just as suddenly as it started, silence. No more noises, no movement, just the sound of my own heart racing in my ears. I wanted to tell myself I was imagining things, that the house was just settling, that Bailey was just being overly cautious. But deep down, I knew. He wasn't just watching over me because he was a loyal dog. He was protecting me. But from what? For the rest of the day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Bailey stayed glued to my side, his body tense, his ears twitching at every little sound. I kept telling myself it was nothing. The house was old. Maybe the floors creaked on their own. Maybe I was just paranoid. But the way Bailey acted told me otherwise. That night, I hesitated before turning off the lights. I glanced at Bailey, who was already sitting by my bed, staring at the door like he was waiting for something. "All right, buddy," I murmured. "You win. I'll leave a light on." I turned on a small nightlight and climbed into bed. Bailey let out a soft huff and lay down, but his eyes never closed. At some point, exhaustion took over, and I drifted into sleep. Then, I woke up to the feeling of breath on my face. My eyes snapped open, my heart leaping into my throat. Bailey was standing over me, his nose inches from mine, his breath warm but urgent. His eyes weren't on me, though. They were looking past me, toward the corner of the room. A cold chill spread through my body. I didn't want to turn around. Every instinct in me screamed, "Don't look," but I did. And for a split second, I saw it. A shadow. Still. Just standing there. I sucked in a sharp breath, and in that moment, Bailey lunged, not at me, but at the empty air. His teeth bared, his growl deep and furious, louder than I had ever heard before. And then, just like that, the shadow was gone. The air in the room changed, like a pressure lifting. I could breathe again, but my hands were shaking. Bailey stood in front of me, panting, his body tense, watching the corner where the shadow had been. He stayed like that for a long time, until finally, he turned and nudged me with his nose, as if to check if I was okay. I buried my fingers in his fur, holding on to him as my mind tried to process what had just happened. I wasn't alone in this house, and somehow Bailey knew all along. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that shadow, felt the way the air had changed, how heavy it had been, like something unseen was pressing down on me. Bailey stayed alert, sitting close to me, his body tense but calm, like he had done his job. He wasn't afraid, but I was. By morning, exhaustion had settled deep in my bones, but I forced myself out of bed. I needed answers. I called the shelter, hoping they could tell me more about Bailey's past. The woman on the phone sighed. Bailey's previous owner was an elderly woman named Margaret. She adored him. He never left her side. Something about that made my chest tighten, a deep, aching pressure that settled right beneath my ribs. My fingers gripped the phone a little tighter. What happened to her?" I asked, though a part of me already knew I wouldn't like the answer. The woman on the other end sighed softly, her voice turning gentle. "She passed away in her home. They said Bailey refused to leave her side, even after she was gone. When the paramedics arrived, he was lying next to her, protecting her, as if he didn't understand she was already gone." I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. The image she painted was so vivid, so heartbreaking. I could picture Bailey, curled up beside her, waiting, hoping. Staying with her because he didn't know how to do anything else. Because love, for him, wasn't something that just ended. I pressed a hand to my chest, steadying myself against the unexpected wave of emotion rising inside me. "Miss," the woman asked gently, "are you okay?" I blinked back the sting of tears and cleared my throat. "Yeah, My voice wavered. I exhaled slowly, trying again. "He's been acting strange since I brought him home, like he's watching over me, protecting me." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, the kind that made my skin prickle. When the woman finally spoke, her voice was quiet, thoughtful. "Margaret used to say Bailey could sense things. She always said he was her guardian, that he could see things she couldn't." A chill ran down my spine. I glanced at Bailey, who sat at my feet, calm but alert, his deep brown eyes locked onto mine, as if he already knew what I had just learned. I shivered. Maybe Margaret had been right. Maybe Bailey wasn't just an ordinary dog. Maybe he was still guarding someone. I thanked her and hung up, but the phone felt heavy in my hand. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of everything. Margaret, Bailey, the strange presence in my home. How did it all connect? I set the phone down, exhaling shakily, my chest tight with emotions I couldn't quite name. Grief, understanding, something close to relief. When I turned, my eyes landed on Bailey. He was sitting by the front door, completely still, his gaze fixed on it, as if he were waiting for someone. His ears were perked, his posture calm, yet alert. There was something about the way he sat, so patient, so sure, that sent a chill down my spine. "Bailey?" I called softly. Slowly he turned his head toward me. His deep brown eyes met mine, filled with something I couldn't quite explain. It wasn't just loyalty or affection, it was knowing. A deep, quiet understanding. My breath caught, and suddenly, It all made sense. Bailey wasn't just protecting me, he had been sent to me. Margaret had loved him fiercely, and now that she was gone, he had found his way to me. Someone who needed him just as much as he had once needed her. Maybe this wasn't just coincidence. Maybe in some way I couldn't fully understand, he was meant to be here, meant to guard me, meant to save me. Margaret had loved him with all her heart, and now he had found me. It was almost as if fate had brought us together, two souls burdened by loss, searching for something, someone, to hold on to. Bailey wasn't just any dog. He had been more than a pet to Margaret, just as he had become more than a pet to me. He was a protector, a quiet guardian, a constant presence in the darkness. And somehow, in the midst of my own grief, he had chosen me. The realization hit me so hard that tears welled in my eyes before I could stop them. My chest ached, but it wasn't the sharp pain of loneliness I had grown so used to. It was something different, something softer. I knelt beside him, my fingers trembling as I reached out. Bailey didn't move away. Instead, he stayed perfectly still, as if he understood what this moment meant. A sob caught in my throat as I wrapped my arms around his sturdy frame, pressing my face into his soft fur. He smelled warm and familiar, like home. "Thank you, Bailey," I whispered, my voice breaking. He let out a deep sigh, the kind that made it seem like he had been holding something in too. Then slowly he leaned into me, his body solid and steady, as if he was saying, "I've got you. You're safe now." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. For the first time in what felt like forever. I didn't feel alone. I held on to Bailey, my fingers buried deep in his thick fur, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breath. It was warm, grounding, something real in the midst of everything I had been through. A lump formed in my throat, and I squeezed my eyes shut, letting the moment sink in. This house had never truly felt like home, not until now. I had spent weeks drowning in silence, feeling like a stranger in my own space. The weight of grief, of loneliness had made the walls seem colder, the nights longer. But Bailey had changed that. He had given me something I didn't even realize I needed. As I pulled back to look into his deep brown eyes, a strange sense of peace washed over me. There was no fear anymore, no lingering shadows. Whatever had been here, whatever presence had lurked in the dark corners of my home, Bailey had chased it away. He had protected me. I let out a shaky breath, running my fingers gently over his ears. "You saved me, Bailey," I whispered. The words felt so small compared to what he had done for me, but he seemed to understand. His tail thumped lightly against the floor, and he nuzzled his head into my shoulder, a soft huff escaping his nose. I smiled through the tears that welled in my eyes. I had saved him too. We had both been lost. Him, after losing the only person he had ever known, and me, after losing the person who had meant everything to me. But somehow, through all the grief, through all the pain, we had found each other. And in that moment, I knew. I wasn't alone anymore. I never would be. Bailey would always be by my side. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the story and found something meaningful in it. If you did, please take a moment to like, comment, and share. It helps so much in spreading the love. And if you're not already subscribed, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss any future stories. Your support means everything to me and keeps me going. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment below. Until next time, take care and keep believing in the power of change.